Hey everyone, Stevie TPFL, and we're back with another edition of the Morning Grind podcast. It's a wonderful Monday. It's Patriots Day. It's April 18th, and we got a 1 o'clock game, or 11 o'clock game actually, here in Boston. And I got a special guest joining me today. Kind of been hanging out with this guy all weekend, but never sick of hanging out with this guy. And how you doing, my friend Emac?
I'm doing good. We had my first experience with a NASCAR event. Got to go with the Stevie TPFL pit pass down on We were on Victory Lane. We were in the media center. We got to meet a couple drivers. I stood next to Richard Petty and Joe Gibbs and Richard Childress. It was a good time. It was a good time. Felt like I was brushing elbows with greatness. Unfortunately, my DFS teams did not follow suit. NASCAR, anyways.
That's okay. It happens in NASCAR. There's variance and, all that stuff. Like today, for instance, Kyle Larson had one of the best cars on the track and just had some bad luck. Things break on these cars and you can't predict that kind of stuff. So you move on to next week and, get it going. But we're here to talk about some baseball, and it's a pretty good here Monday slate. And let's get it started. Toronto at Boston, 11 o'clock game, morning game here. Clay Buchholz, J.A. Happ. What stands out to you here in this game?
Don't play the pitchers, and it's going to be early, 11:05, as you mentioned. It's Patriots Day. I believe it's the Boston Marathon tomorrow also.
That's interesting. No, I didn't know about the marathon, but that just means that we've got to play some of these hitters. But so if we're targeting some of these hitters, let's start off with Toronto. Who do you like here against Buchholz?
Well, I'm going to vote for darn near everybody against Buchholz. I believe he is the proud owner of a no-hitter. However, that was a while back, and there have been several gas can-like outings since then. I think we can look to our usual suspects of Edwin Encarnacion, Jose Bautista, Josh Donaldson, Troy Tulowitzki. You could even throw Chris Colabello in there. All five of those guys have a 350-plus WOBA against right-handed pitchers over the last 2 years.
Yeah, the only thing about Tulo, he's the one name that stands out to me here. He's 3,100 on FanDuel. He's 6 for 47, and only 2 of those hits have been extra bases. Yes, they both were home runs, but off to a slow, cold start here. I think I go with Edwin, Donaldson, and Bautista. I don't know about Tulo. He might not be a guy. And then if you're playing game theory type of thinking here, this game's going to be highly owned on your all day slates on FanDuel and DraftKings. So the all-day slates are interesting. Definitely some options that I like here for the Red Sox. Instantly stand out to me the most is Alexander Bogaerts against the lefty. 4,200 is a pricey price tag for him.
Yes, but he is pretty good. What about Mookie Betts?
Yeah, Mookie is the other guy I wanted to talk about. Both of these guys definitely in play for me. And if I remember correctly, Jackie Bradley Jr. is actually pretty good against lefties, so he could be maybe a sneaky option here in this early slate. What do you think about him?
I try not to think about him, Stevie. Not a fan. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but he came up a couple years ago and was supposed to be the next big thing. He was not. And then last year, he actually was a pretty good player. So I don't think we should dismiss him outright. I am just personally not really a fan of his.
Yeah, he's just really sneaky against lefties. Being a lefty and batting in the 9 spot. Last season he had a 394 WOBA with a 222 ISO against lefties. So that's pretty sneaky numbers. And we're playing this all-day slate to try to get some contrarian plays. It might be Red Sox biased, but I think Bradley's an interesting option here at 3,200. Hanley Ramirez, 2,900. Does he pique your interest at all?
He actually does a little bit. I like how he has been looking pretty comfortable at first base. On the flip side, unfortunately, you will be using your first base slot on Hanley. However, I think most people feel that way, and they aren't going to take him. Now, yeah, he was a much more exciting player to take when he was shortstop eligible. Heck, even when he was outfield eligible last year. But if you want to look for a contrarian play, I think he's kind of by default going to be one with the limited first base eligibility.
Yeah, last name we'll talk about here before we move on to the next game. Actually, there's two more names that I want to bring up here. One's Dustin Pedroia, 2,900, at least 9 fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games. Is Pedroia a guy that you like here?
Long story short, I think against J.A. Happ, we like everybody. Pedroia is an interesting one. I noticed that he was down the lists. I know, Stevie, I'm going to say it. He was down the draft list on season-long leagues. For whatever reason, he was way, way down there. You know what? He's performed quite well over the first 2 weeks of the season. I think the early predictions of his demise may have been off a bit. And he's been with Boston for a long time. They always play on Patriots Day. This is going to be one that I think favors the hometown guys because they're playing, a good hour or two before anybody normally is used to playing.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting scenario here. The last name I want to bring up for Boston, because I'm expecting him to get the start, and he's min salary $2K on FanDuel for this slate, and that's Chris Young. And we've seen Chris Young last year hit left-handed pitching really well, 327 average, and then I think the weighted on base was 409 with a 248 ISO. Pretty much a must play for me if you're going to play this early slate if he's in the lineup.
I would completely agree, Stevie. He was someone that last year, I believe, was last year a Yankees year for him?
Yeah.
And then previously, I want to say
Arizona.
Oakland, Arizona, yes, with stops in between. I think he's someone we definitely want to look at. And, boy, your flexibility can really go up when you have that discount, deep discounted salary.
All right, let's swing it on over. We're going to talk about the late slate here. We got a pretty nice 7-game late slate. If you're not playing the all-day slate, this 7-game late slate, main slate, we would call it, it is pretty solid here. And we're going to start off with probably one of the best pitching options on the board for the whole, entire day. And it's Syndergaard getting to face off against Jerad Eickhoff. Looking at both of these pitchers, I think they both piqued my interest. What's your thoughts here?
Oh, goodness, Stevie. You asked the tough questions. We've had a long, exciting weekend. I am going to say that I'm going to vote no on Eickhoff, just barely, because I have been believing all season in the Mets offense. I think they had a good game today. Finally, and I hope this is a sign of things to come for them. But by default, I would much rather go with Noah Syndergaard.
Yeah, Syndergaard, probably your safest option on the board for cash games. Gets a matchup. Yeah, it's at Philly on the road. He pitched a little bit better at home last year, but still a matchup that you can completely take advantage of, the Philadelphia bats. So definitely the guy you're going to want in cash games, but I think Eickhoff is a guy that is going to surprise a lot of people. His advanced stats, look really solid. And he's a guy that I've used a couple times. I used him in that game against San Diego, which doesn't say much. It's the Padres. But, the Mets got to him a little bit. The thing about the Mets, they can throw a lot of left-handed bats at him, and that's what he struggled with since being called up last year. So, that's one thing that worries me. That's why I say he's a tournament option only. And that's if you need to fit in a lot of these bats, which roster construction will decide that in tournaments. But I think Syndergaard's the way to go in cash games here.
Totally agree. And just for those listening at home or in your car, I'm not dismissing Eickhoff, just not in this particular matchup. I think he's one of those guys. He's got a funny name. It's not really going to stand out. He plays for the Phillies. He's someone we're going to want to look to from time to time this season, as I suspect his price will continue to stay somewhat suppressed.
If you had to target any of these Mets bats against him, who would you target here?
Definitely want to look at the lefties. So that means Granderson and Conforto are probably two of my favorite guys. Granderson still has the honor of being the old man, but he's leading off. And then Conforto right now is generally, it seems like he's hitting sixth, but I'm expecting good things from him this year. So I definitely want to take a look at him.
Yeah, I like his price tag at 2,700 a lot here. Are we finally, just waiting for Lucas Duda to get it going, or are we going to keep taking him here at 2,400 in a plus matchup?
I think we have to keep taking him. Although I hate to say it, Stevie, he's no longer a cash game option. He was previously because he has a lot of power, but he does take the walks, which is always helpful, particularly on FanDuel. But we're not seeing that upside as we once did. And by upside, I mean, I think he has 2 home run upside at any given game, which I'm happy to put forth in tournaments. He's on a cold slump, so we're not even getting that boost in our head-to-head formats. So tournament only for me, but we definitely want to keep our eye on him. I mean, I think even you could get a synergy stack with all 3 of those guys.
Yeah, just to put in comparison, it's a pretty small sample size as far as the year goes for this season, but last year, Duda, and pretty much throughout his career, his average is right around 46 to 49%. Last year was 50% of fly balls that he hit. This year, he's hitting like 26% fly balls, and he's hitting 50% ground balls. He's actually pulling the ball a lot more here to start the season, not trying to use the opposite side of the field. So I don't know if it's something that they're noticing, which I'm sure they are, because, they're looking at everything every day. So it'd be interesting to see, if we start seeing, and this is where people say they don't watch baseball and then they can't pick up on anything. But if you're watching the Mets games and you see Duda starting to hit the ball to the other side of the field, this could be a time when that, maybe whatever was wrong, he maybe is fixing that. They're working on it. So just a little thing, you can look at so much stuff when it comes to fantasy and baseball. There's stats for everything. But it was just something when I was going through my research, I just happened to pick up on. So I just kind of wanted to point that out there. So it's just something that I noticed.
Yeah, and one thing, just so our listeners know, over the last 2 seasons, in over 750 at-bats against right-handers, Duda has a 375 WOBA. You'll hear us quote that number. We generally like anything above 340. That's weighted on base average. He has a 250 ISO. For ISO, that means isolated power. We like anything above the 200, 210 range. That's definitely elite. And then he has a 145 WRC plus. Now that is weighted runs created plus. And what that means is they've come up with a fancy metric that neutralizes ballpark factors. And what it does is it creates a league-wide baseline of 100. So with Duda having a 145, that means he creates runs, either scoring them himself or batting in others, 45% more than the average ball player against right-handers. So those are all fantastic numbers, meaning Duda's going to turn it around at some point, and we want to be there. I'm just not quite there yet for my hard-earned cash. For my frivolous, let's go big or go home, you betcha.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a tournament option here. I just pointing out some stats here with Duda because – 2,400 instantly stands out to anybody that's followed baseball over the last couple of years. Now, looking at the Phillies side of things, Franco's a guy that, I'll throw in some tournament lineups, but I just don't see any upside here for the Philly bats.
No, I would agree, particularly against Syndergaard. One guy maybe. How do you feel about Cespedes for the Mets? 4,200, a little pricey. It's a righty-righty matchup, but he has comparable numbers to what I just quoted for Duda. Are you interested in him?
The problem is Eichhoff is really good against right-handed bats. So that's one of the reasons that I loved him against the Padres. He was going to face a lot of righties. Since being called up last year, he's only allowed a 197 WOBA to right-handed bats. So good numbers against righties, really high strikeout rate at 29.9% since getting called up last year. I don't think I'm going to have Cespedes in this game or any of the, David Wright, any of the Mets righties, none of these guys, because I really do believe in this kid's stuff against right-handed bats.
Fair enough. Sounds good. I will trust in your judgment?
When it comes to pitching, I know a thing or two about pitching. But all right, Washington at Miami. Your Nationals coming to my home state, not my favorite team, but my home state, taking on the Miami Marlins. Jose Fernandez, Tanner Roark. Jose Fernandez at home here. We know that he is a much better pitcher at home. And the one thing that we were talking about kind of in the car today on the way back from the racetrack is I was really worried about Fernandez's velocity. And I looked into it a little bit more. He hasn't been touching the high 99, like 99.5, 99.8 range, but he's still touching the 98 and high 97. So I think the velocity is going to start coming here for Fernandez in this game.
I would agree. I like him definitely on this side. And from that perspective, the only matter I would consider is Bryce Harper. And this is going to be one of those times where I think we will get him at a discounted ownership. However, am I reading this number correctly? There's a smudge on my computer. Is he really 6,000 tomorrow?
Yeah, that's what happens when you put up at least 24 fantasy points in 4 straight games and you've hit 4 straight, or home run in 4 straight games. So Harper's on fire right now. This is definitely a matchup that I'm not paying $6K for Harper.
No,
I'll take the odds here.
4,200 on DraftKings. You can talk me into it. I don't have an issue because, again, I think he's going to be on 15% of the teams at the most. But the Nats, up until this weekend, being Saturday and Sunday, were averaging 4 runs a game, even though they were 8-1. So their pitching's been getting it done a lot of the way. I think a really good pitcher has a good shot at shutting them down, and I'd like to take Jose Fernandez tomorrow.
Yeah, I think he's a really interesting tournament option here. And then looking at the other side of things, Roark's a guy that I like to target with left-handed bats, and why not one of the best hitters in baseball for the last couple of years, and that's Dee Gordon. What's your thoughts on Gordon here?
I like him. I like the stolen base upside. I think there's a good chance he can get on against Roark. And the Nationals catchers are not exactly the best at throwing out base runners. They kind of get in hot stretches, and then they completely, lose their mind, lose their interest in holding base runners on. So somebody as elite as Gordon, I don't think it's really going to matter who's behind the plate. He's got a good shot of making a single turn into a double real quick. You also want to look for fly ball pitchers going against Roark, or fly ball hitters, because Roark tends to be a fly ball pitcher. I think Justin Bour is someone we want to look at. All 26 of his home runs last year came against righties.
Yep, 2,800, got his first home run of the season 2 nights ago against Atlanta. A guy that, at 2,800 presents home run upside. I do agree here. I'm not ruling out a Marlins stack. I think Stanton and Ozuna are in play as well. Roark, really small strikeout rate here. Doesn't strike out a lot of batters, pitches towards contact, and I think we could target him here with even some of these right-handed bats. You watch him more than I do. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, he is the king of the warning track fly ball. So, as you mentioned, a lot of it is contact. He works relatively quickly, not Mark Burley quick, but he doesn't mess around on the mound. And everything is just going after the hitters. Now, he doesn't have fireballer stuff, so he counts on his defense quite a bit, hence the long balls. I think Stanton, Bour, and probably Ozuna all can muscle it out.
Yeah. Let's move it on over. Colorado at Cincinnati. Alfredo Simon against Jordan Lyles, and I think it's really interesting that Nolan Arenado is actually more expensive than his starting pitcher for the day. That'll kind of tell you what we're looking at in this game. I want nothing to do with either one of these pitchers in American Small Park. What's your thoughts?
Totally agree.
All right, we'll start it off with the Cincinnati home bats here. Jordan Lyles is a guy that 368 WOBA, 28% hard contact rate to lefties, and maybe one of the best home run hitting lefties in the Major League Baseball, and that's Carlos Gonzalez. I think he's one of the top plays here.
Wait, Jordan Lyles?
Votto, I'm sorry.
I was all ready for you to talk Votto. For those of you listening, we were up very, very early and heading off to the track both days this weekend.
All right, back to the Reds bats against Lyles, a guy you can target with lefties. I'm not even going to edit that out. I think it's awesome that I messed that up. So, all right, so Lyles, 368 WOBA, 28% hard contact to lefties. So Votto, Bruce, definitely guys you want to target here.
Absolutely. We love Votto in all formats. He has the home run upside pop. He generally gets on base via walks. He's got a 920 OPS in his last 580 at bats against righties and nearly a 400 WOBA. So he is a fantastic option. 3,900, not a bad price at all. On DraftKings, a little more spendy at 4,600 proportionally.
Yeah, and it's not like Lyles was much better against righties. 320 WOBA, still a really hard high contact rate here at 28%. So I think you could target guys like Suarez, who is just off to a tremendous start here. 15 hits and 47 at-bats, including 4 home runs. Definitely a guy that can get the job done, and this ballpark is definitely a favorable ballpark to target.
What about Devin Mesoraco? Are we ready to look for some punt catchers yet?
No, I continue to play him. It's going to happen, right? He's just going to.
2 years ago, he was so good. He was so good.
You know, he's going to get the timing and everything back. He's going to be fine. So at 2,700, you know, if he's in the lineup, he usually bats in the 5-6 spot. I think he's definitely in play here.
All right. One last one I wanted to ask you about. I cannot bring myself to take him anymore. Jay Bruce.
I think he's a home run upside guy. Lyles, like I said, really struggles lefties and gives up a really high hard contact rate. So I think at 3,800 you can target Bruce in this matchup, but he's only a tournament option ever, so don't ever play him in cash games.
All right. Well, I'm not going to play him tomorrow, so chat, that is my gift to you, or chat, the audience. See, Stevie, you get me on this podcast. I've done probably 150 video shows since my last podcast. Now I've gotten 2 in 2 weeks here with you. I've got to work on my vernacular.
That's okay. We'll allow it this one time. I'm not going to, But, all right, so let's look at the other side of the ball here is targeting, maybe guys like Carlos Gonzalez. Alfredo Simone here in this game. Definitely somebody you can target. He's a guy that, last year was a guy that we targeted a lot, and he gets to go into a ballpark where it's just good to target hitters. 369 WOBA against lefties, 320 WOBA against righties. What's your thoughts about targeting here?
Most definitely. I think we want Cargo. We want Arenado. We should, I'm guessing, see Ben Paulson play with Charlie Blackmon on the DL and Corey Dickerson now on the Tampa Bay Rays. We do have Gerardo Parra as an option. He's kind of coming in as a 4th outfielder, but he's going to be pressed into duty also for the Colorado Rockies. And this, while not as good as Coors Field, the Great American Ballpark, as we like to call it, small park, is definitely a launching pad.
All right. I got to talk about Trevor Story. Every time I do a podcast, I got to talk about Trevor Story. 4,600, 7 home runs this season, definitely going to hit. I can tell you to say that he's going to hit at least 25 home runs this year. He's a guy with good power, good approach at the plate. 4,600, I would expect him to be low owned here. I think he's an interesting tournament option.
Yeah, I'm not against it at all. Anybody against Simone is a good one for me.
All right, Chicago Cubs at the St. Louis Cardinals. John Lackey getting a face-off against – he pitched with the Cardinals last year, didn't he?
Indeed he did.
John Lackey facing off against his old team, Mike Leake, facing off a team that he saw quite a bit, Being a Reds last year, this is an interesting game. Lackey opened as I think he opened as a favorite. Yeah, he opened as a small favorite here in this game. What's your thoughts on Lackey at St. Louis?
So here's the thing. I think the Cardinals have a secret underground laboratory where they keep minting out these major league ball players, and they scare me. Every time we think that they're going to be done, they reload. Remember Matt Adams? Well, we don't need him anymore because we've got Grichuk coming into his own, and Stephen Piscotty is playing pretty well. And then, who was the young? I say the youngster. I think he was 25 or 26. Hazelbrook they just recently brought up. All of a sudden, those guys are all there. Everybody works the count. They hit as a team. They hit behind the runner. It's the Cardinal way. It's infuriating as heck, but they score runs. So I'm scared of anybody against the Cardinals, no matter what the situation, except maybe Clayton Kershaw.
Yeah, and trying to take pitchers at St. Louis, even though he's familiar with the ballpark, it's such a hard ballpark to target opposing pitchers. The Cardinals are just a really good home team. I don't like Mike Leake in this game as well. He struggled quite a bit last season with lefties and gave up a pretty high hard contact rate to righties. So I don't think either one of these pitchers are safe options here.
Nope. I think we're going to be looking to the offenses here.
So let's look at the offenses. We got the visiting Cubs against Lackey against Leake. I'm so used to Lackey being on the Cards.
He was on their team for one season.
Yeah, one season's a long season when you do all this stuff. But anyway,
every single day. You're right. We do this 180 times a year compared to football, where we do it 17 weeks of football plus 3 postseason weeks. Yeah, you're right. It was a long time ago.
All right, so let's Cubs against Leake first here. Visiting Cubs taking on Leake. He's a guy with a high fly ball rate. Like I said, pretty high hard contact rate. Is there any of these Cubs that you kind of want to lock in? Prices are up on these guys.
They are. I was a little surprised about that. I wanted to go with Miguel Montero. Even though he's batting lower in the order, he's fantastic in lefty-righty matchups. We've already seen him with a couple home runs this season. 2,900 is not what I was hoping for. I was thinking maybe 2,600. Now, there's not if we look to Syndergaard or if we look to Fernandez, there's 2 pitchers we can spend on, but 2,900 is still reasonable, so I don't mind that per se. Anthony Rizzo, I think, is a slam dunk. He is a fantastic player. And then, of course, you had Jason Hayward, who was per your definition, Stevie, I think he was a longtime St. Louis Cardinal for one season last year. But I think he's in a nice spot against Mike Leake also.
Yeah, I'm losing my mind. It happens to the best of us. Mike Leake's definitely a guy I want to target. So I think I'm going to target him with guys like maybe Rizzo. Zobrist is a guy that I like against him here. And then pretty much everything you said. One guy that I really don't love is Brian. I want to see him, kind of get more consistent for his $4,400 price tag. But I can't hate these guys. Hayward, like you said, 3,500. Definitely somebody we can look at. So now looking at the Cardinals against Lackey, like you said, this team continues to just produce hitters out of nowhere. What's your thoughts on some of these guys?
Well, somehow I forgot to mention Colton Wong, who's another guy that came up, sort of materialized at second base when they needed him. So I like all those young guys I mentioned. I think they can handle Lackey. Okay, Lackey is an adequate pitcher. He's solid. He gets blown up from time to time, and he pitches gems from time to time. He's not overpowering, but he doesn't get killed consistently. So I like up and down the lineup. I think Carpenter will be one of my favorite plays, particularly on DraftKings, 4,100. He's 4,300 on FanDuel. I think we can look to Grichuk. However, they haven't been playing him every game against righties, which is kind of surprising because he has pretty good history against righties. We should see Piscotty in the lineup. I'm good with him, good with Wong. And then Hazelbrook, if he's there, I'm all in. I normally would be fired up to take Matt Adams, particularly at his $2,300 price. He just does not look good this year, and he's getting replaced for pinch hitters. So I'm off the Matt Adams trade.
Yeah, I love targeting left-handed bats against Lackey. I did it quite a bit last year. Paid off for me. Pretty high WOBA, nice hard contact rate at 31.4%. I think Brandon Moss is an interesting tournament play here at 3,400. Probably going to get overlooked because of his price. And how dare you mention Hazelbaker and pronounce his name wrong?
Well, he's not. He's a rookie, so he's not on my list. I'm looking at my model, and I was like, oh, I'm missing somebody. Oh, yeah, it's the God, I can type in HAZ and find him. He's been priced up on quite a few sites, but we still gotta like him.
How dare you not mention that he is ham baked? Oh man! All right, let's
wait. What is ham baked? He has a nickname already. Oh my goodness, I was not aware. See, I got to get on this thing called Twitter.
Oh, Angels at White Sox. Hector Santiago going into Chicago to face Carlos Rendon. What's your thoughts on these two lefties? I think it's an interesting matchup for these guys.
Rondon, I always get at the end, and I was going to not do it. My first boss ever, Cashmere Valley Pharmacy, was Ron Doan. So every time I see Rodon, I think of Rondon. Very fond of him. He was a good first boss. Think It's a Wonderful Life, except he wasn't like Mr. Gower. I think he's a talented player. I think the same thing of Santiago. I'm not taking Santiago today. I think that the White Sox are pretty solid generally against lefties. I will, however, look to Rodon if I'm looking for a cheap pitcher, because the Angels' bats have been a little cold. Now, we've seen signs of Pujols kind of getting things going. And Mike Trout, of course, is arguably one of the top 2 or 3 players in baseball on any given day. But the rest of their ranks feel a little light. So I'm okay with going with Carlos.
Yeah, a guy that really neutralizes left-handed bats. Even last year. The one thing that worries me about him is he has such a high walk rate, and that could, run up his pitch count. If he can get around Pujols and Trout in this game, I think he's going to cruise. So for that instance, I think he's a great option for tournaments. The strikeout upside's there against the Angels. And then Hector Santiago, when we think about him, if he can get around Jose Abreu and, Todd, he should be able to cruise. So, they got guys like in this lineup that, can hit left-handed pitching. Frazier, Lowry, Garcia. There's some options, even Jackson, for instance. But none of those bats really scare me like Abreu and Frazier do.
I agree with that, Stevie. I'm looking for a place where we can argue on something. I'll find one here.
All right, so if we're targeting, Rendon here, we're going to target him with right-handed bats. That's what he struggled with last year and this year's. Looking back when he got the call up, 347 WOBA with a 30 hard cons righties. So maybe we want to look at guys like, Pujols, Trout, maybe even Escobar towards the top of the order there.
Does Giovanni Soto interest you at all?
Dude, I'm all about punt and catcher. If you have a catcher that you think is going to bat up towards the top and has good splits like he does, then sure. So if he does get the start and he's up towards the top, I'll punt catcher every day.
2,400, so I think we have a chance with him.
So looking at the White Sox things, we both kind of like these pitchers as options for tournaments. Do you like any of these White Sox bats, maybe out of Frazier and Abreu?
Those would be the guys. They would be tournament only for me. They both have multi-home run upside. Unfortunately, it seems like Frazier used all of his up in the first half of last season and then in the home run derby and kind of forgot how to hit home runs. And Jose is not hitting the ball very, very far like he used to. So I'm hoping when things heat up a little bit in Chicago, we can turn back to those guys as power sources and hopefully have discounted prices. But at this point, neither one really excites me that much for tomorrow.
Yeah, I think both these pitchers are in play. Not going to target a lot of bats in this game. I wouldn't be shocked if this game ends 3-2, 2-1, something low scoring here. Wouldn't bet the over if I was a betting man in Vegas. Milwaukee Brewers at Minnesota Twins. We had a laugh about this in a chuckle earlier. Brewers maybe one of the best or worst offenses in baseball. Phil Hughes, maybe one of the worst pitchers in baseball. Phil Hughes against the Brewers. Chase Anderson against the Twins.
Something's got to give here, Stevie. So either the pitchers are going to have a duel and it is going to be magnificently epic, or both offenses are going to wake up and just turn these guys into pinatas. And I have no clue as to what's going to happen.
Yeah, Phil Hughes, a guy that really struggles with right-handed bats. Milwaukee can throw a lot of right-handed bats at him and wasn't much better against lefties. Chase Anderson, mediocre against lefties and righties. So it's a really interesting game because outside of Braun, who's 4,100, there's a ton of value here against these pitchers. And I'm looking, and this is one of the highest totals of the day as well. So it's really interesting. So let's start it off with Milwaukee bats on the road here against Minnesota. Where would you target some of these Brewers?
Well, we see LaCroix batting cleanup a ton, and I don't think that's going to change. He's 2,800 on FanDuel. While not a punt, it's close enough for someone of his ability. So we got to like him. Ryan Braun, 4,100. I'm okay with that because it is Phil Hughes. And then, dare we say Chris Carter?
Yeah, Chris Carter actually comes up really high on him. He's a guy that I wanted to talk about because, he's a guy that has double home run upside. He's 2,900. And when we're looking at Hughes' stats, dating back to last year, 366 WOBA, 32% hard contact rate against righties. This is exactly the type of matchup that, Carter could have a big game here. So 2,900, I definitely am going to look at him in tournaments. I don't think Chris Carter's ever a cash game play.
No, but Chris Carter can indeed stroke it.
Now, looking at the Twins side of things, it's not like Chase Anderson's going to scare you off of anybody. His hard contact rate was actually pretty solid against lefties, so I think I'm going to stick to targeting guys like Sano and Park. What's your thoughts on the Twins?
I'm more sad that you missed the opportunity to say that Anderson's not going to chase you away. It was there for you, Stevie.
That's what I bring you here for.
All right, we're getting a little rummy. It was a long day. I definitely like Sano. He keeps seemingly changing his position eligibility depending on what sites you're on. I've seen him. He looks like he's outfielder on both sides now. He's a third base on some sites, and he's first base on some sites.
Yeah, you kind of got to go side by side on that. He's outfielder. He's only 2,900. I think he's a great play. Nothing really stands out to me outside of those two guys for Minnesota. Is there anybody that stands out to you here? I don't play Joe Mauer. He's first base. He has zero upside, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a shame that he is not what he once was. So I'm good with just rolling with Sano personally.
Mauer, he's not hitting the ball. He continues to hit and get on base and stuff. He scored fantasy points in at least every game out of the last 10 games. And that might mean something on the old scoring, but the new scoring at first base, you need pop. So if the scoring ever goes back, which we all hope happens eventually, then it might be something we look at. So last game on the slate here, Arizona at San Francisco. Rosa traveling into San Francisco to take on Jake Peavy. Both of these pitchers off to a mediocre at best start to the season, I would say. What's your thoughts on these guys?
Peavy is sitting at a 10 ERA right now over his last couple appearances. I want no part of that. And then, no part of his opponent either.
All right, so we're going to target some of the bats here in this late game. Going to bring you home with the late game hammer here. San Francisco, of course, so it's a 10:15 Eastern game. It's the only late game on the slate. It's very interesting because there's a lot of options here that I want to talk about. Let's talk about Arizona first against Peavy. If you had to target some of these bats, who are you going after?
I am a fan of Goldschmidt regardless of who he's facing or which-handedness. Everybody knows that he's an absolute stud against lefties. He is also very, very good against righties. He's got one of the top 10 WOBAs over the last 2 years. His ISO numbers are fantastic. And, hey, he can actually steal a base here and there. So that's always fun also.
My boy David Peralta has not been doing much for me here. I play him probably more than anybody else. He has hits in 4 straight games, but he hasn't shown that upside that we love, Peralta for. He was very consistent with power last year and getting on base. 0 home runs this year. I actually love this matchup for him. I probably say that every day, but I think he's in play again here in this matchup.
If you are not a fan of Peralta, or if your confidence in him is wavering, I would suggest kind of splitting things. He's 3,300 on DraftKings. So if you play on DraftKings and FanDuel, he's 34 on FanDuel, but 33 on DraftKings. That's darn near punt level on DraftKings. So I think you can find yourself a happy medium and not quite abandon ship, you non-believers out there.
Yep, one other guy I want to talk about here for Arizona is Jake Lamb, 2,500, third base eligible. Presents some pop. We haven't seen it a lot lately, but he's still a guy that could, easily, belt a home run, double. And so he's another guy that I like against PV here.
I think Lamb had 2 home runs the other night? Oh, no, it's Yosmani Tomas.
Yeah, that was today, Sunday.
Sunday Fun Day, Stevie, is turned into Sunday Very, Very Long Day.
I get to see what I do all the time when I go to traces. All right. Ruby De La Rosa is the last guy we're going to lock in here. Actually,
quick question. It might be Archie Bradley.
That's what I was just about to say. I don't know why I put down – because FanDuel has Ruby De La Rosa. So, it's actually Archie.
Yeah, he was announced this morning. It was supposed to be Ruby, but it looks like it's Archie Bradley now.
Yeah, I read that on Twitter before we got on here too. So Archie Bradley going to get the start here. Didn't see a lot of him last year, but what we did see of Archie Bradley, he got hit really hard by right-handed bats. And with that being said, Buster Posey, Hunter Pence out here in this matchup.
Yeah, I'd be willing to double down on those. I also would not be afraid of Span, who hits pretty well against lefties and righties. He's at the top of this offense. I miss him. He turned out to be the spark plug for the Nationals last year. They didn't have him and were horrible. But when he came over 2 years ago, he was fantastic. It's an even year. It's the Giants. They're World Series bound, Stevie. It's because, it's destiny. But I think Denard Span's going to have a lot to do with that.
Yeah, one of the names I want to mention here is counting any of the lefties, Panic, Belt, all those guys, interesting plays. But I want to talk about Matt Duffy. I overlooked Matt Duffy probably more than anybody else. I don't think I rostered him maybe more than once or twice to start the season here. And he's had the upside of the 15, 16, 17, 18-point games. This is a good matchup for him. Like I said, Archie Bradley's a guy that got hit really hard by righties. So really low strikeout rate from what we've seen in Bradley last year against righties. I think Matt Duffy's in play here at 3,000.
He's got a beer named after him. He's the Duff Man. I'm in.
All right. That wraps it up for this slate and this podcast. Me and EMAC are both sun-tired. So it's one of those things where – we hope you guys enjoyed all the mess ups because we're exhausted. And EMAC, as always, thank you for joining me on this podcast today, my friend.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, guys, we'll be back at it tomorrow. I'll be back in my office, in my home, in my safe place. Looks like, we'll have a host, joining me. I'm working on still making that happen, but it to be a cash game player is what I'm thinking. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And you guys can come back tomorrow and figure out who that is. I hope you can. And good luck on your Monday contest here, and I will see you tomorrow.